Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. My name is Emma Mamo and I'm Head of Workplace Wellbeing at Mind, the mental health charity. Mind provides advice and support to empower anyone experiencing a mental health problem. We also campaign to improve services, raise awareness and promote understanding of mental health. Mind is leading a major new project called the Blue Light Programme, which is dedicated to helping support the mental health of emergency service personnel, including staff and volunteers working within the search and rescue service, police service, ambulance, and then also within the fire and rescue services across England. The programme will focus on raising awareness and tackling stigma within the services, building resilience to help search and rescue staff and volunteers manage their mental health, and then providing training for team leaders so they can better support staff and volunteers, and then providing information and support to all who need it. This webinar and others in the series have been made specifically for emergency service personnel. Joining us to share their experiences of mental health and well-being whilst working within the Search and Rescue Service are Ross Greenhill, who is Area Commander within Her Majesty's Coast Guard, and then Timothy Sutherland, who is Head of Standards and Technical Training, also within Her Majesty's Coast Guard. In this webinar, we'll talk about mental health at work and the key factors that can affect our mental health whilst fulfilling our role or tasks, and how to put in place a comprehensive strategy to support the mental health of staff and volunteers working within the search and rescue services. And then also hear from Ross and Tim about their experiences. So what is mental health? We all have it, same as we have physical health. It exists on a spectrum and we move along it from good to poor. It's affected by many things in life, both in and out of our workplace and volunteering responsibilities. And mental well-being is just as important as physical well-being, and maintaining both is an important part of staying fit and healthy. And they both directly impact upon our ability to achieve and maintain quality of life. Mind knows that 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health problem in any given year, so mental health and well-being is of great importance to all of us, not only in understanding our own mental health, but that of others we will undoubtedly come into contact with, so colleagues, but also the general public. Mind knows that there are over 220,000 emergency service personnel working across England. So it's likely a quarter of these people will experience a mental health problem every year. However, we also appreciate that the prevalence could be slightly higher because of the challenging nature of your roles. But we found it's actually even higher than that. As part of the Blue Light Programme, we carried out a survey of 3,500 Blue Light personnel, and we found that 87% said they had experienced stress, low mood or poor mental health whilst working for the emergency services. So this seems to suggest that, working in the search and rescue service and indeed other emergency services means that you are particularly vulnerable to having your mental health negatively affected. And this is probably because you're exposed to pretty tough conditions and traumatic events on a daily, on a very frequent basis. But what we also found in our research is that staff and volunteers work hard to prevent any mental health problem affecting their performance. But this can come at a large personal cost, impacting on your families, your relationships and your physical health. And I think there may be many issues that contribute to that. There may be just about stigma in terms of seeking support, but it could also be about not wanting to negatively impact on your colleagues. The idea of, if I take time off, we've got quite limited resources, the impact it will have on my team members and my colleagues. So there may be a lot contributing to that, but it is quite concerning that emergency service personnel really do try hard to hold it together while on the job, but then in their personal lives, that's where they kind of take the impact. So in terms of the key factors that affect people's mental health while working or volunteering in the search and rescue service, as part of the survey, we asked people to share with us those kind of key issues that really do impact on them. And what we found was that some of the biggest factors, the biggest issues, include juggling, home and work home and work commitments. So this idea of work-life balance. So managing your day jobs, your family commitments, and then your volunteering role. And linked to this is never really knowing when a call-out might take place, and then the impact that has in terms of interrupting your life and your other plans and so on. And then not being able to resolve all call-outs successfully, and what that then means in terms of the human impact of that. And of course linked to that is that exposure to distressing or traumatic events. And obviously some locations see a higher rate of people taking their own life at those locations. So again, operators and responders in those areas, again, more likely to be exposed to distressing incidents. And then just the fact of being a call handler and taking emergency calls, especially those relating to someone who's experiencing suicidal thoughts and maybe making an attempt at taking their own life. And then all of that, if you're not prepared psychologically, mentally prepared to deal with that, you know, the impact that that can have. And then working in isolation or being geographically isolated, you know, some roles work alone as so you're dependent on your own skills, or maybe your only companion is the search and rescue dog with you. And then looking at the kind of more day-to-day requirements of the job, so training commitments, maintaining that required level of safe and effective search and rescue services, and the training that underpins that. And then for staff and volunteers, bringing quite diverse skills and experience, and that in itself can be a bit challenging in terms of relating to each other and building that kind of sense of cohesion for teamwork. And then the kind of long gaps that can happen between call-outs can result in team members not seeing or communicating with each other for quite long periods of time. So there's quite a long list there of quite routine factors, you know, that people are frequently kind of dealing with, which obviously can have a huge impact on their mental well-being. And as we can spend, you know, a substantial portion of our lives at work or performing those kind of volunteering roles, and you get absorbed in a sense of responsibility for that role and towards your team members. So therefore it's no surprise that, you know, this can really impact on our mental health and our well-being. And mental health problems can affect the way we think, feel and behave, and it can directly impact on our, you know, our creativity, our motivation levels, our focus and performance. But the nature of work that search and rescue personnel engage with is certain to expose them to greater levels of danger and stress, and linked to that, you know, depression or anxiety or other mental health issues. So the relationships that develop between team members and colleagues is really important in terms of providing peer support, and you know, they can play a really vital role in helping us to cope with issues as they arise, or indeed recover from difficult periods or challenging or upsetting call-outs. But it's also important to promote a positive culture around mental health and provide the right kind of support to staff and volunteers. So in terms of how, you know, a search and rescue service should approach this and make sure they have the right organisational wide approach, we would recommend a three-pronged approach that's rolled out and is reflected in all practices, policies and management procedures. So the first part of this is about promoting well-being to everyone across the service. As I said, you know, we all have mental health and we can all have an interaction within the workplace, whether we're staff or volunteers. So you need to support people to have good mental health at work. And then secondly, you need to be identifying and tackling the causes of work-related stress or mental health problems. And this involves recognising the signs and being aware of the causes of mental health problems, which can allow you to assist colleagues effectively, especially when things are kind of identified early on. And then the final part of it is about being able to support staff and volunteers experiencing a mental health problem, you know, no matter where they are on the spectrum. So they might be experiencing some stress or anxiety related to workplace issues, or they might be going through a temporary period of emotional distress related to, you know, a life event or, you know, a change in their circumstances, or they might indeed be living with a diagnosed mental health problem. And then it's about, you know, how do you support them to manage that condition while also performing their role. So this is really about just making sure people get the right kind of support at the right time. And I will say that senior leadership is crucial. This needs to be top down and seen as a priority for it to really be a kind of comprehensive approach. So in terms of how do you promote well-being, I'm going to outline some general principles, but obviously these principles and approaches can look different in different workplaces, and indeed might be more challenging to adopt in some operating environments. But I think it's useful to kind of outline what we know helps people keep well at work, and even if the exact thing isn't possible, you can then think through, well, how else can we do something similar? So in order to foster a positive and healthy working culture around mental health, there are several steps that can be taken, such as putting mental health on the agenda, you know, talking about mental well-being regularly, And someone from within the search and rescue service was saying to me earlier that by talking about mental health and what you need to do to have good mental health, will kind of promote that positive culture and normalise it. So then people are more aware and more comfortable to talk about their mental health when they might be experiencing a problem. So this idea that you're kind of normalising it. And then also linked to, you know, keeping mental health on the agenda. If you are having debriefs with colleagues or, you know, the team members that you supervise and so on, if you're building in questions around their mental health and how they're doing, again, this will help normalise it and potentially pick up if they are struggling. And also if you do follow-up calls, you know, if people, you know, come and do a call out and they're a volunteer and then they're not in for quite some time, you know, doing a follow-up call just to check how they're doing, and again, talking about their mental health would be really helpful. And then, as I was saying earlier, strong leadership is really key in this area. So having the kind of senior management and leaders be positive and promote an open and clear culture that, you know, values staff and volunteers is quite crucial to this. And again, that idea that if you're talking about people's mental health and you're saying that people's mental health and promoting good mental health is important, that then also promotes the message that if you are struggling, we will stand by you, we will support you. So that's all part of creating the right culture. And then, you know, supporting opportunities for people to take time out where at all possible. Obviously, this isn't always possible if there are call-outs and so on, but if there are opportunities where people can have some downtime, even on duty, just making sure you do support people to take this as and when can really help people manage their resilience and their well-being while doing their role. And I think linked to this is about ensuring people take their annual leave and take sufficient breaks away from duties. So again, they get that sense of a work-life balance. And then looking to see whether you can support flexible working where at all possible. Obviously, this needs to be negotiated in consultation with managers and colleagues. But, you know, people do have lives outside of work and volunteering responsibilities, so just seeing if you can be flexible in terms of people's start and finish times and so on. And it's also helpful if people are living with a mental health problem. Sometimes that can be beneficial in terms of a bit of flexibility. And then promoting open dialogue and involving colleagues and team members in decision making as appropriate, so people feel a sense of control about, you know, how the service operates and how they're expected to perform their role. And then linked to this is ensuring good, clear communication and developing trust. I think that communicating effectively is a highly valuable skill and plays a huge part in creating mentally healthy working cultures. And then linked to this is then creating opportunities for staff and volunteers to raise issues, home or work. I think it's important to be approachable and respect confidentiality if people do share quite personal things about, you know, what's impacting on their mental health, and then you can look to explore you know, what you could do in response to that. And then investing in staff and volunteers, so being able to support them around learning and development and career development where appropriate. And we also find that promoting physical and social activities both in and out of work can again build those positive relationships that are so important when, you know, needing to draw on them during a tough time. So this idea of trying to promote peer support or buddy systems is quite crucial, I think, within the search and rescue service. And I think that a lot of services are building in these kind of structures and approaches. So we'll be hearing about that quite soon. So that's another positive approach to put in place. And then moving on to how do you identify and tackle the causes of work-related mental health problems. Again, an organisational approach is key. You know, this really needs to be reflected in your policies and practices, backed up by training for managers or team leaders who have that kind of pastoral responsibility for someone's welfare in the workplace. And this will mean that, you know, leaders are better able to understand mental health and how to support staff and volunteers who might be struggling. So how you do this is by routinely taking stock of the mental health of your staff and volunteers, so you can get a true picture of what's really going on across the service. So by regularly checking in, whether this is formally and regularly or just informally where appropriate, will allow you as a team leader to really understand what affects your personnel in their role. You can also understand what you're doing well to support them, so you can build on it, but then you can also get an idea of the factors or current ways of working that are having a negative impact on your service. So this can help you then develop a plan for improvement, which in turn will increase productivity and enhance morale. And also some search and rescue teams have chaplains who can provide support, and we've heard of team leaders that phone around after a tough incident to check in with everyone, which again is really positive to hear. So in terms of our top tips for team leaders and how they can kind of be alert to the potential workplace triggers, I think first and foremost it's for team leaders to build their confidence on mental health, so you feel able to have these kind of conversations. So that's one about understanding the kind of support and services that your search and rescue service can provide to staff and volunteers, and then also just building your confidence really to open up the conversation. So as I said, by checking in regularly with the people you're responsible for, whether this is like regular debriefs or follow-up calls, just building in a kind of check-in or just asking about their mental health can really help build the trust needed so people can feel confident to say when they're struggling. And it can also help resolve issues early on before they become more of a serious issue. And linked to this is just being available for your team members and ensuring that, as I said, that these kind of debriefs after major instances and distressing call-outs do happen just routinely. And then treating people as individuals. People seek support in different ways. For example, someone I manage, if they're struggling, they want me to send them an email to say, how are you doing? Because they want to think before they answer. They don't want to feel put on the spot. Whereas someone else I manage has always said, if you think I'm struggling, invite me out for a coffee so we can talk about it. So, it's just trying to understand how best to approach someone based on what they've shared with you. So leading on from this is, how do you support someone who might be struggling with their mental health? So as I said, the more informed you are and the more confident you are about talking about mental health, the better equipped you will be to support your staff and volunteers. In terms of support measures and workplace adjustments that can be helpful if someone is struggling with their mental health, these generally fall into three broad categories, including changes to how the person performs their role or tasks. There may be changes to the role itself, and then also the provision of extra support. So implementing some changes to how people carry out their role will of course depend on, the feasibility of this will depend on their specific responsibilities and can be explored directly with your team and leaders and so on. But some examples of what might be helpful include supporting time out, so enabling them to take time out from a situation, if only for a few minutes if they are finding it quite challenging. Offering quiet rooms or some kind of space where people can take time out and sit without interruption would be helpful. And then relaxing absence rules for staff with disability related absence. So for example, I know within some services if someone has a certain number of days off due to ill health, this can kind of sometimes trigger an interview and a review about what's going on. But obviously if someone is living with a mental health problem, they may have to take time off. So just relaxing those kind of rules can alleviate what could be an additional stressor to someone if they feel that they might be kind of facing not a disciplinary issue, but at least a bit of scrutiny. It can be a bit of a stressor. And then agreeing to maybe give an employee or a volunteer leave at short notice and time off if they have to attend mental health appointments such as therapy or counselling, again, can help people manage their condition while still remaining in work. And then maybe exploring some changes to how they conduct their work or roles. This could be permanently or in the short term, but potentially reallocating some of the tasks or making some changes to their duties. And then maybe if it needs to be more significant, redeployment to a more suitable role, or then providing training and support to enable them to apply for vacancies or opportunities elsewhere within the service. Team leaders can also provide extra support through increased supervision if appropriate, or just increased catch-up times, or providing training or coaching or mentoring to help someone feel more confident in their role, and then providing positive and constructive feedback. And again, what I was saying about ensuring debriefing sessions or phone check-ins take place after difficult incidents. And then providing opportunities to discuss and highlight successful outcomes and achievements. If someone is experiencing poor mental health, this can also have an impact on their self-esteem. So building in some time to reflect on what has gone well can help counter any negative thinking they might be experiencing at the time. And then again, it's about reminding staff and volunteers of what wellbeing support is available in and out of their service. And some colleagues may also find it beneficial to take part in a buddy system, so being paired up with someone else potentially who has a lived experience of a mental health problem, who can then kind of share how they've managed their condition while in the workplace. That can be helpful. Or if there are support groups where they exist, where again people can kind of access support in a group setting. And then, as I was saying before, about providing quiet rooms or a safe space at work where people can have some time out, or maybe have a sit down and a chat with, you know, a trusted colleague, or access some support or self-help during that time, can be beneficial. And I think it's also important to regularly review any support measures or adjustments that you may have put in place to ensure they're working, and then make any further tweaks or adjustments if needed. But I think ultimately, you know, both providing and taking the time and space to address any mental health concerns or worries early on will go a long way to ensuring a more positive outcome for that person. So following on from this, you know, how do you know if someone needs support? Observing the people in your team, you may notice changes in them. But I will say that people can often experience the same mental health problem very differently, so it's important to never make assumptions. But then also sometimes there's no outward sign that someone is experiencing poor mental health. So that's why it's so important to create an environment where people can be open and say when they're struggling. But as I said, you know, you should never make assumptions, but some potential indicators that someone might be experiencing poor mental health can include, you know, changes in their behaviour. If they're quite a chatty person, are they withdrawing a little bit or not engaging in kind of banter with their colleagues? Changes in their appearance. People can sometimes struggle with personal self-care, so just looking to see if there have been any changes in the person, if they're experiencing a loss of motivation or potentially missing training commitments and so on, or if they're experiencing a lack of concentration or increased drinking or smoking, or indeed if you just become aware that maybe there's been a change in their circumstances or a significant life event like a breakdown in their relationship or a bereavement. Again, this might be an indicator that they're going to be struggling with their mental health, which can have an impact on their ability to perform their role. But I think what's quite interesting about the search and rescue service is that probably the people most likely to spot a change in someone else are their team members. It is other colleagues, it is other staff members, other volunteers, rather than, you know, the team leader. So I think it's important to create the kind of culture where people feel confident and comfortable to say that they have a concern about a colleague. But I think how you then respond to that is really important, so people don't feel like it's an environment where people are being monitored. So I think it's just about responding sensitively and with empathy can really help build that trust and ensure that you seem approachable. So in terms of how to actually start the conversation and kind of try and get someone to open up if you do feel they might be struggling at this time, you know, find the time and the right space to have the conversation, preferably as early on as possible, so you're not letting things escalate. And it's just as simple as just saying to them, how are they doing? I think that's more, you know, if you say to someone, are you okay? They can answer yes, no. But I think if you try and make a more of an open question, you know, how are you? That should open up the conversation. And if you do this regularly, as I was saying, you know, building in this routinely, that it becomes normal and it becomes part of the working culture, so it won't be so jarring if you do feel like you're needing to have this conversation because you have spotted a change in someone. So it may help to ask these kinds of questions during supervisions or debriefs and check-in conversations, as I said, routinely. And I think it's important to just let the person do the talking as much as possible. And once you've begun such a conversation about someone's mental health and, you know, how it's impacting on their job and vice versa, I think it's important to try some of the following. You know, acknowledge the issues they have raised. Sometimes people just want to share their worries, and that can be as much support as they need. However, if there are some significant issues going on, you know, identifying some positive steps to address these issues, you know, the things that someone might be struggling with can be helpful. So suggesting small steps, making them achievable and appropriate and relevant can be really helpful. And then consider some simple but realistic adjustments to someone's role, task, or perhaps, as I said, offering extra support. And I think some important things to remember is being positive, focus on what they can do rather than what they can't, and try and involve the person as much as possible in finding solutions. People are very likely to be the expert in what they need, so letting the solutions come from them is helpful. And also I think because when people are experiencing a mental health problem, they can feel a sense of a loss of control. So again, trying to put as much control back in their hands will help counter that. And I think the key thing I would emphasise to team leaders or whoever, colleagues who are kind of trying to open up these conversations, it is about having the confidence to ask someone how they're doing, and when they say I'm not doing too good, that you then have the confidence to work that through with them and see what can be put in place to support them. And you're not meant to be a health professional. I think it's just as simple as saying, based on what you've told me, let's try this out as a support measure or as an adjustment, and let's agree to review it in a couple of days or a week or whatever's appropriate to see if it's helping and make adjustments if needed. And also, I would caution that although you think it's the right time to raise this issue, once you broach it with the person, once you say something, you can't unsay it, and this is quite a personal, sensitive issue, talking about your mental health. So although you might think it's the right time to have this conversation, the other person might be a bit hesitant. So I think it's about saying, well, if there is something going on ever, my door is always open, so please do come back to me and let me know if there's anything I can do to help. So just making sure you kind of promote that idea of an open door. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a tool that might be useful to roll out across the search and rescue service. So when someone's living with a mental health problem, they would develop a wellness recovery action plan with their health professional, which talks about how they can sustain good mental health, what might cause them to experience poor mental health again, and then what might be some of the early warning signs that they are struggling. Now, at Mind, we've kind of trimmed this down because it's quite a comprehensive toolkit someone would develop with their health professional, and we've trimmed it down to be used in a kind of workplace context. But it follows the same format. What do I need to do to have good mental health at work? What might cause me to experience stress or poor mental health? And then what are the early warning signs that I might be struggling? And then what are some of the steps I need to take? And then what are some of the steps that my supervisor, manager, or so on might need to take in terms of providing support or workplace adjustments. And they're really useful because it's kind of, at Mind we have them for all staff, but if someone has been diagnosed with a mental health problem, then we absolutely recommend that they have one in place for managing their mental health at work. But as I said, we offer them to all staff because we all have mental health and there is an interaction within the workplace. So it's quite positive, quite an individual tool, and it just says, what does this look like for me? So I just wanted to kind of get your views about, do you think, it seems like you're doing a lot of positive things within the search and rescue service, so it can sometimes be difficult if there hasn't been much of a conversation about mental health in the workplace to introduce these. But I guess it's for you guys to say, do you think it would be a positive thing? Would it be received positively? Just maybe from you, Ross, any views?
Yeah, I think it's something we could use. We're kind of moving in that direction anyway with the things that we're promoting at the moment. But formalising it a bit more would probably be quite helpful. So yeah, I think it's something that we could use in the service, and certainly from our full-time staff point of view, I think it's something that would be reasonably easy to put in place. Our volunteers, it might be more difficult because we don't have quite as much contact, but I think it's something that we could adapt and move forward with. Yeah.
But that might then be useful for volunteers because, as you say, if they're not always, they're not in the kind of work environment on a daily basis, and there can be quite a long time where they're not in contact, then potentially, taking account of that within their wellness action plan to say, well, how can we make sure you get adequate support, could be quite a positive thing potentially.
Yeah, it could be. The amount of time that we have with them is fairly small, and the impact that we have on their life out with Coast Guards and out with search and rescue is quite high. So we do have a system where they have a meeting where they can get together with representatives from the service and put forward their views on how things should work. So we'd have that opportunity to put that to them and see how they think it would work for them.
Well, that'd be quite good because then they can kind of say, how it would work best and have a sense of ownership
on
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tim, any views from you about how useful that might be?
Yeah, I think it will be. I think it's a natural progression of what we're doing anyway. We have an occupational health service which has mental health expertise, but I'm not convinced myself that we're probably doing enough to sort of educate our managers and people in what it means to return to work with mental ill health. I mean, some of the sort of consultants we use the occupational health service say that you know, there is this perception that people come back to work and that's it, they're ready for full employment or for full volunteer duties, and we know that that's not the case. You know, it's a case of, with mental ill health, getting the self-esteem back, getting well again, and I think we could probably do more on that regard of helping people understand, particularly those managing volunteers or managing staff, that, you know, this is a slow burn. It would take a while before they're back to the person you knew once before. Maybe they'll never be quite the same again. So I think, yeah, that would be useful, and we can work with our occupational health services and other support and make sure we have those things evolved. So it would be a good step forward, I think.
Sounds good. And as you said, I mean, you can't just roll this out. There does need to be training from managers in terms of how to implement a tool such as this. And as you said, you know, someone returning from, you know, a period of sickness absence, you know, you can identify, you know, support measures or workplace adjustments that could help them.
Yes.
But with a wellness action plan, you know, it should be a living, breathing document that, you know, you kind of review periodically to say, you know, is this working? Is there anything we need to tweak? You know, just for anybody, because we can all evolve in our jobs and change duties, and all stuff happens in our outside life that has an impact. So it should be something that does evolve with the person. That's really great to get your views on that, and quite good to hear that it could potentially be quite useful. Mind has many free resources on our website that can support this way of working, and there are links provided at the end of this webinar, along with other sources of information and guidance should you or your personnel need it. So please watch out for the details at the end. There is also a range of support available for anyone wanting to talk to someone about their mental health or about any other concerns that they may have, whether it is about work or relationships or other health issues or money and other such things. Obviously, speaking to someone in your workplace or the service within which you operate will be most beneficial if they are aware of mental health and the interaction it can have with your role and responsibilities. So a large part of what the Blue Light programme is trying to achieve is ensuring that Blue Light services promote a more positive culture around mental health and a more positive approach in terms of acceptance and support to ensure that people, you know, staff, volunteers can get the right kind of support at the right time. Outside of work, there are also many sources of support available which personnel may find helpful. So, you know, the employee assistance programme that you have both spoken about today, people can access that. Obviously that is linked to your workplace, but there's also going to your GP or phoning Mind's Blue Light info line, which can give information of the services and support available in your local area in terms of mental health support. And again, details of this will be given at the end of this webinar. Taking part in our webinar and here to share their experiences of volunteering for the Search and Rescue Service, as I said before, is Ross Greenhill and Tim Sullivan. We're now going to hear from Ross.
2 years ago, I realised that I was struggling with my mental health. I'd been working away for long periods, working long hours, and was quite frankly exhausted. I hadn't realised that my resilience was dropping until I had to deal with a serious incident. The incident wasn't a Coast Guard incident, which is probably partly why I got caught out. I was travelling in a marked vehicle and came across a quite serious road accident. When you're driving the blue light vehicle, obviously it means that the public expect you to do something to actually help out and make a difference at the scene. I stopped at the incident and tried to help provide first aid. All Coast Guards are first aid trained. But despite all my efforts and the efforts of the other services, police, fire, ambulance were all there, two of the people in the accident actually died. The hardest one was the fact that I'd been talking to one of these people for over an hour, basically trying to keep them calm, holding their head still because of the type of incident it was. But when he was extracted from the vehicle by the ambulance crew, he went into cardiac arrest and died. Normally, when we deal with things as a Coast Guard incident, I would have had a debrief there and then with all my colleagues. We would have got together and diffused what had happened, diffused the situation. On this occasion, I was essentially a member of the public to the other services, and I was stood in the middle of a dual carriageway. waiting for the police to come and take my details for future events. And the ambulance crews and the fire crews and the police were all standing having their debriefs. So I was standing there completely on my own, feeling a little bit out of it, a little bit phased. I gave all my details to the police, jumped in my car and headed back home. Didn't get very far, got down the road and just burst into tears. Had to pull over. I just couldn't hold it back anymore. For the next couple of weeks, I really struggled with mood swings and just feeling really down. And eventually I made a call to our employee assistance programme to speak to someone that might be able to help. That was difficult. Making that decision to actually involve someone else was a bit of a challenge. When I spoke to the counsellor, they suggested that I visit my doctor because they felt that I may have depression. And right enough, my doctor said I did have depression and also an element of post-traumatic stress from the incident and probably a build-up of other things and other incidents that I've attended. I was offered cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT, through the NHS, which I was quite lucky. I got it very, very quickly. I was able to see a counsellor almost immediately.
That is great.
But I also got counselling through the EAP as well to deal with some of the other things that had been going on, mostly to do with being away from home for a lot of time, and it really just knocked me for six. And with those combinations and the work that I had to do with them, I was able to get control of things a bit more and knew what my triggers were and how to deal with those stressful situations that I was ending up in. And it made a big difference, made a massive difference. It's not perfect. I'm not, where I used to be, but I can certainly deal with things a lot better using coping strategies, for example. Having someone that I could actually talk to was probably the biggest help. I didn't want to talk to my family about it because it's partly not appropriate to talk to my family, especially given that we work and live in the same area that these things happen. But I didn't have anyone at work either that I could speak to because I work pretty much on my own most of the time. So actually having the ability to use EAP was extremely helpful, made a massive difference. Speaking to them, they didn't judge what had happened, they didn't judge me in any way, which, that was probably my biggest concern. And they allowed me just to talk through things and try and work out what happened and why it happened and really highlight the issues that I'd suffered from. What I will say is I've learned from that, and as a manager, I'm very much more aware of how things can affect my staff and the volunteers that work with me. And I also know that when someone says they're fine, that's not necessarily true.
Sometimes you have to probe a bit deeper.
You do. I mean, if you might have an inkling that there's an issue, you maybe just have to push it a little bit harder. I know I said I'm fine a lot of times, and I wasn't. I was far from it. As part of a rescue team, we have sort of a group strength. Debriefs at the end of incidents and getting together and talking things through can make a massive difference. And I think that was the thing that I missed that didn't work for me. And people can slip out of that by accident, or they can actually take themselves out of it sometimes. So we need to be aware that that's happening. But the fact is, there is a lot of help out there for people. I just think people don't necessarily know about it, and we need to kind of promote that it's there. But again, the hardest thing is actually getting them to ask for that help. And if we can kind of help them get that, it can make a huge difference.
And I guess it's just trying to create that kind of culture so people feel comfortable to say, I'm struggling.
Absolutely. And I think we're moving forward with that. We're getting somewhere with that now. People are a little bit more accepting that help is available and that they can ask for it. But we're not quite there yet.
No, but it's a journey, and you're kind of making the right kind of steps.
Absolutely.
And when you say debriefs, I mean, is that just, we have them at Mind if someone's taken a distressing call, a call from someone in distress, like a member of the public, and then it's about, for the kind of staff member or volunteer to kind of say, this is what I did, and then to reflect, was there anything I could have improved, and then just help someone process that instant and move forward. Is it quite similar in terms of?
Yeah, it's pretty much identical. It's looking at, quite often we'll think, if I had done something differently, would it have been a different outcome?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time that's not the case. A lot of the time it's not going to make a huge difference. But it's good to be able to get that through and process that information, and discussing it is the best way to do that. And yeah, we will debrief every incident from the very smallest up to the biggest major incidents.
That's really good. So it's quite routine.
It is, and by making it routine,
it normalises it.
It becomes normal, and people feel included and more willing to put into the system and put into the process if we do it regularly.
Oh, that's really positive. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for kind of sharing that personal story, because I think a big part of what the Blue Light programme is trying to achieve is to kind of make it okay for people to say I'm struggling, and I think what's most important is for people to hear from other people working and volunteering within their service that this has happened to me and this is what I've learned from it and this is what we've put in place following that. So that's really positive. So thank you, Ross. We're now going to hear from Tim Sullivan about his experience of volunteering for the Search and Rescue Service. So just over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Tim Sullivan. I'm the recently appointed Head of Standards and Technical Rescue for HM Coast Guard, which is part of the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. Prior to this role, in fact only a few weeks ago, I worked as a health and safety lead in the agency. I was involved in stress management initiatives, which included return to work after periods of mental ill health. So I'm very interested in this particular subject. I became aware of the sort of mind of the Blue Light programme a couple of months ago. I was invited to the opening presentation up in London. Been involved with other colleagues in looking at how we can improve our service. We have 400 plus employees in our service and care for over 3,500 volunteer Coast Guard rescue officers, so it's an awful lot of volunteers that we have to manage. Our staff are split between those operating Coast Guard operations centres, so these are the ops rooms, around the country, and those working and training with the Coast Guard rescue officers themselves, like Ross. Our volunteers come from all walks of life these days and are a vital part of the Coast Guard, so very important to us that we maintain their mental well-being. They're all trained in a wide variety of tasks, including search and rescue along the coast and estuaries, along with technical disciplines such as mud, water and cliff rescue. So very, very busy people. And we have over sort of 20,000 call-outs a year. So there's a lot of activity. Perhaps the public don't realise just how busy we are. Most of these are fairly routine, but some can be very traumatic, as Ross touched upon there. And they can have a lasting impact on the rescuers, both those on scene and those actually sort of coordinating the rescue from the confines of an operations room. Yeah. I'll give you a scenario which is based on a real event. This was some while ago now, but we had some kayakers which were trying to seek shelter from increasingly rough seas. They completely underestimated the weather conditions. One of them soon got in trouble as the waves sort of crashed into the base of the rocks that were near them, and it really was getting close to threatening to smash them against these rocks. The alarms were raised and the ops room sort of tasked some assets to go out to the rescue. This is things like the RNLI lifeboats, Coast Guard helicopter, Coast Guard rope rescue teams and so on. So there's a lot of people involved in this rescue. Once the lifeboat and rope team reached the scene, it soon became obvious that this was going to be a very challenging rescue, not least due to sort of access down the cliff and increasingly difficult weather conditions, the sea state, etc. The lifeboat found it couldn't enter the area because of the sea state, and the rope rescue team, for a variety of reasons, really struggling to get to the casualties position. So it's becoming very, very treacherous conditions. But the rescuers got close to the casualties and were able to talk to them and sort of reassure them in some way. And we all had some confidence the rescue was imminent. But instead the conditions worsened suddenly and the kayaker died. So a very, very tragic event. This incident really shocked everyone involved and was compounded, of course, by the distress of the family and relatives and friends.
Of course.
Quite apart from the impact on the rescuers themselves, these ones at the scene actually seen what happened, the ops room staff were badly affected because they were in the ops room and they knew the rescue assets were there and they were almost celebrating success of another successful rescue, but it didn't happen. So they were quite badly affected by that and shaken up by the whole experience. So the number of people actually affected by this one incident broadened quite considerably. It wasn't just the Coast Guard, it was the other police service as well. Everybody involved were quite shocked by this. And this is not unfortunately not an uncommon type of incident. So, but, you know, with this incident, the local management did act promptly, and Ross touched upon the employment assistance programme, which we rely on a lot. And councillors were brought in from the scene, so this is a weekend, but they came down and offered assistance very, very early, and were able to talk to people on the scene, in the ops room, and this was absolutely invaluable. And the feedback we've had from having such a service has been very, very positive, and it's something that we turn to on a number of occasions.
And people feel quite comfortable accessing it?
They do now. I think the stigma's beginning to evaporate with it, as Ross was saying. So as more people, certainly as senior management encourage more use of this service, people are happy to turn with it sooner rather than later before they really sort of dwell on the problem too long. So it is encouraging, yeah. Dealing with stress and mental health is high on the agenda of the MCA. We have a number of support mechanisms in place with more planned for the future, this being one of them. In the first instance, we provide information, support and counselling to our volunteers by way of immediate hot debriefs, which Ross mentioned, and it's embedded in our sort of training for dealing with traumatic incidents. So that's all good progress.
Yeah.
And it's supported by the EAP counselling service. HM Coast Guard are very keen to engage with Mind's Blue Light programme and are learning a lot from other sort of emergency services experiences, so that's all valuable to us in moving forward. We have new frontline managers because we're going through a major change in the Coast Guard, so all our new frontline managers are trained in dealing with stress-related illness and returning to work after a period of mental ill health. So that's something new to the agenda which we're bringing to the party. Moving forward,
positive that's being built in from the start.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and we see it as an essential part of it, especially during a period of significant change in the Coast Guard. We're also looking at other sort of initiatives like TRIM, which is Traumatic Incident Management. This is brought in initially by the military to deal with post-traumatic stress. And nowadays you can get training to train TRIM practitioners within an organisation who can respond quickly to individuals who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. Not unlike the EAP service, but it's actually in-house, so it's another sort of structure that we can draw upon.
And very specialist.
Absolutely, yeah. In the last few weeks, we've just started Mental Health Buddying, which is a kind of peer support system. So that's starting to roll out in the agency, and it's been introduced for staff initially, but hopefully we need to roll it out to volunteers as well. And the last thing we're doing is work is also being undertaken forward with the local Minds. So in Southampton, for example, we're liaising with them to see what courses they can run for us, for our staff, at the headquarters and the local coastal area. So there's a lot we're doing at the moment, and this is all part of it. The Blue Light programme we see as a very important piece of the jigsaw.
Brilliant. No, it's really positive to hear how you're kind of taking quite a holistic approach to it in terms of making sure team leaders and the new, did you say area managers or frontline managers?
Frontline managers, well, these are things
managers,
like the senior coastal operations officers and the likes of Ross, who's a area commander for a group of those people. So it's important that we talk to those people and train those people appropriately.
So they feel comfortable broaching these conversations.
Absolutely.
And making sure that they can kind of feel comfortable providing support and know what is available in terms of the organisation's approach, sharing what we know works, but for you guys to kind of take those general principles and adapt them for your operating environment, because it's quite challenging, as you said, you know, you're fighting against the, you know, nature elements and so on, but you're still trying to, you know, do what you need to do.
Absolutely.
We hope that you found viewing this webinar helpful. We have produced additional webinars in the series entitled Looking After Your Mental Health, and then also one on mental health awareness, both of which are available to view now. Please also take a few moments to give us your feedback by completing the short survey that immediately follows this webinar. It's really important to get your feedback, and it will help us ensure the programme meets your needs. We've also created resources specifically for the Blue Light services that cover these topics in greater detail. These are available to you and your colleagues, so please do, and volunteers, and so please do share these as they may be of help to someone. Please note the details at the end of this webinar will signpost you to further sources of support and information, including Mind's dedicated Blue Light info line. We are determined to reach as many emergency service personnel as we possibly can, so please do make your colleagues and fellow volunteers aware of the programme in itself, and also these webinars, but also the services and support we also have available. Thank you for watching.